It's time then to move on to our next inaugural speaker. She's fabulous. She has more than 25 years of experience in capital markets and investment banking. And since 2015, she's been the global chair of the 30% Club, where she works closely with CEOs around the world to increase women's representation on boards. She also leads the Financial Institutions Group in Europe with the ANZ Bank. And last year, she was also honored with the CBE for her services to the financial sector and gender equality. Ladies and gentlemen, give a very warm round to Brenda Trinauden.
Well, thank you very much. And thank you to the Economic Times of India for inviting me here. First of all, let me say I'm so delighted to be here because Mumbai is a place that's quite familiar to me. I spent a lot of time here in the early 90s and the early 2000s, and I have such a fondness for the place that I named my daughter India. But She's 16 now, and I certainly have a lot of hope for her. So thank you for giving me a good reason to come back. I've been asked to speak to you about why I believe that gender balance is important, how we're tackling it through the work of the 30% Club, and how it ties into what's happening here in India. So what I want to do first is really tell you what the 30% Club isn't. It isn't a women's network, and nor are we a group of women fighting for equal rights. What we are is a global campaign for better gender balance on boards, but also throughout organizations as a business initiative, not as a social one. The chairs and the CEOs that we have signed up all believe that the only way to have real, long-term, sustainable change is to have women and men working together on a voluntary, business-led basis because it makes good business sense. In a rapidly changing environment, all organizations need creativity and innovation to remain competitive, and that will only happen if we have diverse teams. There was a great study done by BCG in Europe in 2017, where 171 companies were surveyed on how innovative and how diverse they were. And the data came out and clearly showed that those companies that were the most diverse were also the most innovative. And conversely, those that were the most innovative were the most diverse. Now, it's difficult to show whether that's just correlation or whether there's causation, but certainly the link was very clear. And what it also showed was that companies needed to have at least 20% of women in senior leadership for it to have an impact on their innovation revenues. Companies that have achieved that threshold already are well known: Alibaba, JP Morgan, and Apple, to name but a few. And so I think that's quite a great argument in itself for more diversity. Unfortunately, however, in times of economic crisis, many organizations really let this drop down the agenda. They think it's a nice to have and it doesn't become a priority. But that's precisely the time when they need to be focusing on more diversity. There are literally mountains, I think, of research and studies that support the argument that more diverse boards and more diverse management teams are much more effective than identikit boards. They're better at decision making, and they're much better in terms of financial performance. Just to give you an example, research from McKinsey shows that companies in the top quartile for gender diversity are 15% more likely to have financial returns above their peers. Their Power of Parity report finds that $12 trillion could be added to global GDP by 2025 by advancing women's equality. It's also obvious that in an environment where there's increasing competition for talent, companies really need to cast their nets as widely as possible. Furthermore, studies by Catalyst show that companies with more women in senior management have lower staff turnover and better employee engagement scores. Their cultures are more inclusive and therefore better for everyone. And finally, there's growing external pressure for companies that are more inclusive to reflect their customers, their wider workforce, and society in general. So it all makes sense, doesn't it? It should just happen quite naturally, but of course it doesn't. And so what we've been doing through the 30% Club is to really try and influence change. We're really focusing our efforts on going out and talking about the business case and then really trying to talk to companies about what they can practically do. Just to give you a bit of background, we started in the UK in late 2010. Many of us were involved in women's networks, and certainly we think that there's a great place for women's networks. They're there to encourage and support, often to provide training, but we felt that they weren't really having an impact on getting women into more senior roles. And so what we realized was that the only way to really affect change was to work with the people that were in power, and often that was the men. So we worked with them to really get them to lobby their peers and to lead change in their own organizations. We started with a group of what we would call enlightened chairs, and very influential chairs. Interestingly, many of them had daughters who had been through university and were at working age, or they had working wives, so they got it already. And they were the first to sign up as our inaugural 30% chairs. They publicly made a declaration that they would set a target of 30% on their own boards, and they went out and they helped us to campaign with their peers to try and get them to do the same. At that time in the UK, the percentage of women on the largest 100 listed companies, the FTSE 100, was only 12.5%. And there were 21 all-male boards. So we set our target of 30% by 2015. And 30%, many of you will know, is really the tipping point when any underrepresented group can really be heard and participate. So shortly after our launch, the government then launched their own target. And their target was 25% in the same time period. Now, they had actually sat down, they'd worked out turnover rates, and they looked at what was achievable, because the government had to achieve their target. So we had growing momentum. We had a great force in the UK working on the same thing. So I'm pleased to say that now there are no all-male boards on the FTSE 100, and on the broader 250, there are now only 2 all-male boards. We're now at 30.9% on the FTSE 100, so we've surpassed our initial target. And we now have 30% Club campaigns all over the world, from the US to Australia, all with varying degrees of positive momentum. So, thank you. So what are the things that we see that really helped us to make this change? And the first one is a point that Julia made, that we firmly believe we had a measurable goal with a time frame, and what gets measured gets done. We had supportive public policy, with the government setting targets and really pushing for the same agenda. We were working with the power base, the chairs, the people that could actually make the changes. We collaborated with many other like-minded groups, and I think, just as Julia talked about women banding together, you know, we need to all work together and to be a louder voice. We had very concerted, very cohesive actions. And very importantly, particularly as this is the economic times, we had constant media attention. And that's been really key to the campaign. And we still have that today. Not a week goes by that we aren't asked to comment in the press, to go on radio, to go on TV, and to talk about this topic. And so I think that the media has been incredibly important. We've also in the UK had increased transparency through gender pay gap reporting for UK companies, and also Hampton-Alexander reporting. But it doesn't stop there, and we also aren't breaking open the champagne quite yet. We can't afford to be complacent, and there's certainly much more to be done. So at the end of 2015, we set a second campaign. we widened our target beyond the 100 biggest companies to the 350 companies, and that was for boards. But more importantly, we're now reaching down into companies and we're targeting senior management teams, because certainly we believe that it's really important to develop a pipeline and to make sure that there is parity all the way through organizations and to have much better balance of women in senior management. Our government has moved on in the same direction as well, and the government-sponsored Hampton-Alexander Review is now asking all of the FTSE 350 companies to report once a year on what their gender split is on their executive committee and on one level below. And I have to say that that reporting, along with gender pay gap reporting, is really helping. So the way that I describe our campaign now is that we're looking to influence three very key stakeholder groups. First, we started with the companies themselves, with the chairs, having them sign up to targets, now with the CEOs, and I'm pleased to say that in the past year and a half, we've signed up 41 FTSE 100 CEOs to set those targets. We've got 28 FTSE 250 CEOs. And we also have an HRD best practice group. We've got a strategy best practice group. We've got the largest cross-company mentoring scheme in the world. So a number of initiatives where the companies themselves are really leading change. The second key stakeholder group is public policy. So I sit on the government advisory board for the Hampton-Alexander Review. We give input into corporate governance code. In the next couple of weeks, we're giving input into the new stewardship code. And also, we've testified about gender pay gap reporting. So anything that the government is doing in this space, we're sure that we get in and we have input and we have a voice. But the third and the most important group, where we've been very active recently and growing, is with our investor group. And the power of investor capital is transformational. We have a growing global investor group with groups in Australia, in the UK, and in Canada. The UK group alone has 33 members of asset owners and asset managers representing 11 trillion sterling in assets under management. In Canada, the group has all of the largest Canadian pension funds. In Australia, the supers and the asset managers. And they're all looking at gender diversity as a stewardship and governance issue, but also as a long-term performance issue. All of our investor group members sign a statement of intent to say that they will actively engage with their investee companies on these issues, that they'll look at the process for identifying suitable candidates, not only for the board, but also for senior management. They expect transparency and evidence of a culture that has commitment to diversity. And if after engaging with the boards and with the management, they don't feel this to be true, then they hold the right to vote against the chair in the AGM. And I can tell you that that's happening. Many of our members have voted against chairs when they weren't seeing enough progress. And not only are they doing that, but they're all sharing this information. So our group meets once a quarter. We look over the list of listed companies. We look at which ones are doing well, and we aim to name and fame those companies. We try and hold up those that are examples of best practice. But the ones that aren't doing so well, we go around the room, we ask who's invested in those companies, and then we go and we ask for a meeting with the chair and CEO, and we have at least 6 or 7 investors sitting across the table to constructively engage with them. And certainly, where the money goes, the power goes, and that is really helping to change things. So how does all this relate to what's happening in India? Well, certainly in India, it feels like public policy is moving in the right direction, with the 2013 Companies Act requiring companies to have at least one woman on the board. And this has clearly had some impact. I think the last figure I saw was 14% on the Nifty 500, and that compares to a global figure of 15%. But I think we all know that that's really not enough to affect change. And so I would also argue that the real impact really comes when companies themselves see the business benefit to having better gender balance, and they start to drive that change within. So I'm guessing that whilst there are some very enlightened business and political leaders in India, The business case may not be as well understood as it is in the UK and in other countries, and culturally, things may be a bit more challenging. Looking at some stats last night, I saw that young women make up about 43% of the group of students taking the Class 10 exams, and they actually have a higher pass rate than the men at 88.5% versus 79% for young men. I also see that there are more young women enrolling in higher education than ever before, but this isn't necessarily translating into more women going into jobs, and we heard the stats that Julia mentioned earlier. I don't know if that's because they're marrying early and not working, if they aren't looking, or if they aren't being successful. But the main thing is that this is the early leak in the pipeline that needs to be addressed here in India. However, this isn't the whole picture. I suspect that the interventions required within organizations are here not very different than in organizations that we have in the UK. So there are lots of areas that need to be addressed within the pipeline. We need to get companies to stop talking about merit for the first thing. We need them to realize that they don't actually operate as meritocracies. Merit is a shorthand for a package of admirable qualities that are innately recognizable, which instantly devalues it. It's a real problem for women working in male-dominated environments where there are deeply held beliefs and norms about who is suitable for leadership. One study actually found that the companies that were the most vocal about being meritocracies were actually the most biased. And if you think about it, if they all think they're being very meritocratic, they probably don't examine their biases and they don't question themselves. We've all heard that expression, he's a great cultural fit for the team. The translation, hey, he's just like me, excellent. Or, she's great, but she's not quite ready yet. There's much more willingness usually to take risk on a man than a woman. And until companies recognize that they're not hiring and promoting on merit, they won't be able to change it. We did extensive work in the UK with professional services firms together with McKinsey back in 2012. We worked with the biggest law firms, the accounting firms, and management consultants. And after analyzing a huge amount of data, I think the firms were all quite surprised that the problem with women getting into partnership wasn't about attrition. Women and men were actually leaving in roughly the same numbers, but there was a real promotion problem. In the accounting firms, men were 3 times as likely to be partners as women. In the law firms, they were 10 times as likely. So a lot of recommendations came out, but roughly they were in 5 areas. They needed to work on a more supportive culture, on sponsorship, allocation of work, those plum assignments that are career-changing. They needed to have more agile working, and they needed to measure and monitor progress. There's that measurement piece again. After all those recommendations and actions, we did a recount in 2015, and there was a huge improvement. The law firms themselves went from men being 10 times as likely up to only 3 times as likely as making partner. But without having analyzed the data, they wouldn't have understood the true problems, and without actively intervening, setting targets, measuring and monitoring them, they wouldn't have made progress. I mentioned sponsors in that list, and I just wanted to make the point that it's really important to differentiate between mentors and sponsors. A mentor is someone that is a sounding board, someone who listens and gives you advice, but a sponsor is someone who really sticks their neck out for you. You know, they're wearing your t-shirt, they're speaking up on your behalf when you're not in the room, and they're actively pushing you forward and finding opportunities for you. Typically, men are much more likely to have sponsors than women, as there are more men in positions of influence and the relationships develop more naturally. So companies need to really develop high potential women with, match them with very influential and powerful sponsors. And they need to make those sponsors accountable. Another concept I just want to touch on is the concept of the accidental manager. So I think everyone would recognize that. You know, when you're in a company and someone really knocks the lights out in terms of their sales targets, or they're technically brilliant, and the reward is that they're given a management role. Sadly, that's often not a reward for the people they're managing. Typically, the skills that make people fantastic salespeople or they're great technicians aren't the same skills that make them good managers. And typically, they're not so interested in management. And companies don't then train them to be managers. So companies really need to spend more time training people to be managers and not to be gender blind, but to be gender aware and to really appreciate that there are very different styles and they need to recognize that. And finally, I just wanted to mention something that we call pinkwashing. So pinkwashing is when you have companies that sound great in terms of gender issues. They have all kinds of women on their website, they spend money on conferences and they put money into the women's networks. But when you look at their actual senior leadership teams, the core jobs are still all men, and they haven't actually done anything internally. And so I think, we need to challenge those companies and actually ask them what they're really doing about driving better gender balance. In reality, it's the CEO that has to actually believe that gender balance is good for their business and prioritize it like any other business goal. The companies that are really successful set those internal targets and they cascade them all the way down throughout their organizations. And so finally, just a couple of points to leave you with. And I think we all have to think about what we're doing in our organizations to drive the change forward. So all of you here today, we talk about 500 million. We've got a huge number of people. India is becoming the most populous country. It's going to become one of the most influential countries in the world. And as I think Martin Wolf talked about in the FT this week, India is going to be leading the change, and what happens in India is going to impact everyone. So no pressure on people in the room. But I think all of you need to think about going back to your organizations and looking at, what are you doing to sponsor a woman in your organization? What are you doing to reach down and pull someone up with you? Or to reach across and be the hand in the small of this woman's back, encouraging her, pushing her forward, to take the next step, to take the new role? What are you doing to challenge the biases when you see them in your organization and to call them out? And you can do it in a constructive way. It doesn't have to be confrontational. But if we don't call things out when we see them, then we're as complicit as the people practicing the biases. And I think also we really need, all of us to think about what we're doing to create inclusive cultures. The thing that the 30% Club is really focusing on this year is dialing up the I in the D&I. You can have as much diversity as you want in an organization, but if you haven't got a truly inclusive culture where everyone can thrive, then you won't be successful. And so all of us really contribute to that inclusive culture. So I guess my call to action to all of you would be, go away after today, and we've got plenty of other great speakers to hear from, and think about what are the 2 or 3 actions that you will go back and you will do in your own organization, and how will you lead the change? We've got 500 million people in this country. Surely we can set the target for the rest of the world. Thank you very much.
Thank you so very much, Brenda, both for that inspiring address, for being the agent of change that you are, and for helping hundreds of companies across the globe increase women's representation. Right. So ladies, as you're already aware, we have a series of absolutely brilliant panel discussions on the agenda today. And it's time now for our first panel. So according to available data, and this is really interesting, Indian women are less likely to own, lead, and grow businesses. They are more prone to discontinue their businesses due to lack of profitability or lack of finance. Frankly though, and no offense to the men present in the audience, I don't think women give up that easily. I mean, we constantly try to improve the men, and that's hell of a job, isn't it? And more times than often, we do succeed at that. So come on, girls, running and growing a business, how tough can that be, right? Well, our very first panel today will explore ways to beat this. Yes, ladies, it's time to talk about startups that won't stop.
Good morning, everybody, and welcome to the ET Women's Forum. It's wonderful to see a full house and to have such an eminent panel here with us to discuss what I think really is the flavor of the moment and has been in India for a few years, starting up. Just about everybody wants to be their own boss. And for us in ET, it's particularly interesting because we were amongst the first to really start chronicling this fabulous change that was happening across India, really. And over the years, we've realized that it sort of gets the zeitgeist, I think, of the times that we now live in. Just about everybody wants to be their own boss. And today we have this absolutely wonderful panel here. There's Priyanka, who's the founder of PopXO, one of the fastest growing content and companies, startups here. There's Sudhir, who's the founder of Chirate Ventures, one of the earliest in the space and one of the most impactful. And incidentally, is also an investor in PopXO. That was not by design, of course. There's Saloni, who has been there, done that, so to speak. But she's been an entrepreneur. She's now on the other side, looking at how it works really from the investment side. And there's Anjana, one of the youngest people in the startup space, who's started really early and has built scale in the e-commerce space, which is very significant. Welcome, and thanks very much for taking time to be here. So the numbers really do not tell such a great story, but when you have people of this caliber here on a stage, you tend to think it's easy to do what they've done. But really the numbers in that sense belie that. So I thought instead of dwelling on what we all know, how difficult it is to start off and particularly to build scale, and that women entrepreneurs perhaps do face a bigger challenge. But I thought it'll be interesting to have people who've really done who've gone out there and done something very different, tell us really how they went about that. So I thought we could start with you, Anjana, in that sense. Did you have to break the mold when you thought of building scale for a brand, to build a brand in India, really? Is that like a double challenge for you?
When I started in 2012, the e-commerce platform, the entire scenario was completely different. At that point of time, there was already Flipkart, there was Myntra, there was Jabong, there was a whole host of e-commerce players already operating. And with the little amount of seed that we raised, we decided very early on that we wanted to be in the brand building game. So the first barrier that we had to break was break the barrier of tech investment and e-commerce. Because nobody believed in a brand related game, saying, what the hell are you building? What does a brand mean, right? So I think the first barrier was breaking that, saying, I don't want to build an app, I don't want to go .com, I want to go the traditional way. I think there's a lot of room for offline retail in India. I don't think there's anybody catering to the youth, and that's the positioning we took. So I think that was the first difficult step, because like I was just mentioning to him that for the first 2-3 years, we refused to get funding because no VC wanted to look at it, saying it's not a tech-based investment. So just to hold your own and then, take the right steps that you believed in, I think that was difficult. But once that happened and when the brand started scaling and then when numbers started generating, then it's a completely different ballgame. Cut to 2 years ago, when it's been a lot more of inbound VC interest saying, listen, I want to invest, are you guys up for it? Right? And now nobody asks me whether I have a .com, now nobody asks me whether I'm app or mobile only. So I think, yeah, it was, the one thing was, what benefited me was getting the right people on board and not chase the valuation. So in 2012, there were a lot of massive valuations flowing around. So it was just to believe in the investors who came on board, and we got people who added value. So I think, people who believed in me, backed me through and through. And that really helped scale and also lay a foundation, because I think most entrepreneurs struggle with continuous fundraise, right? I'm done with Series A, I'm done with Series B, but what next? Like every revenue, every milestone is linked with fundraise. And I think having people who trust you and back you, and in my case, Accel Partners, I think they did a fantastic job in backing me through and through. And it's rare for investors to back one company 5 rounds, and I think they've done it. And I think, it's a combination of both, holding your own and getting right people on board to support and guide and mentor. So that's what worked in my case.
Priyanka, in your case, again, scale is really what defines, Popexo, and I suppose the scale of your ambition and also the stage at which your company right now is. How, was this a conscious decision? Was it a difficult decision for you?
I think we are all predicated, our journeys are predicated by our conditioning. I think that's kind of the starting point in looking at a lot of difficult things that you have to look at in life. So if I look at myself, I recognize very early on in this journey that what excites me is scale. When I'm telling Sudhir this morning over breakfast that, hey, 39 million monthly active users across platform is what we do every month, right? So for me, that is the point that actually gets me up and going every morning. How can I make that 39 into 100 million monthly active users across platforms? So scale is something that you have to appreciate and live with, enjoy if you are going to be in a venture-funded game. Because you have lovely investors who really believe in you and who are willing to back you. But for them also, they want you to show a return on their investment, and that comes through scaling the property, scaling your concept up to a point where it is undeniably the largest in its space, right? Now coming to a point whether it's more difficult for women, not so difficult for women, I think it's to do with the DNA of the entrepreneur. I know a lot of male entrepreneurs who are very happy doing what they're doing, and something like this would probably not be comfortable for them. So I don't think it's gender. I think it's more to do with your conditioning and just basically how you're built. I enjoy this. I get a kick out of kind of seeing the numbers go up. I get a kick out of driving my team mad, trying to do the impossible with no notice. I enjoy that. Some people don't.
Sudhir, it's unusual to have 2 women entrepreneurs here who are really saying all the right things and all the good things really about investors, really, right?
You're sitting right here, I have to, right?
No, but having said that, lack of access to capital is one of the reasons women entrepreneurs struggle. I'm sure there are many here who would agree. How do you view this really as an investor?
So, I think fundamentally, India as a country is capital starved. So it doesn't matter whether you're a man or a woman, whether it is industry, whether it is building a road, whether it is building airports. So fundamentally, if I see around us, we are capital, I won't say starved, lacking capital and risk capital. Now, the information age obviously is here for the country. So effectively, if you look at now, and I'll give you some statistics of our own companies. We have about 70 companies right now, but 14% of our founders are women right now. And 2 years back, it was 9%. 2 years back, about 14 or 15% of the 30,000 employees of our companies was women. Now it's 20%. And in the supply chain, it's about 24%. It's gone up. But I think, and I must add that we realized it hindsight. It was not foresight. 30% of our own fund is today women. And they are giving a bang for the buck to all our senior people. There's no question about it. But did we go out and look for women? The answer is no. I think we looked for merit. We looked for entrepreneurs who could do the right things. And we pushed capital behind entrepreneurs. And by the way, 2 years back, 9%, and today 14% happen to be women as such. So I think capital will run after competence. If there is some affirmative action required, it has to be in the food chain, which is early on, not at this stage. The early on is where seed capital comes in, angel capital comes in. With about 100 odd incubators and accelerators in the country, it's much easier for women to go there. It's much easier than yesterday, and I'm not saying it's easy, right, overall. So I think broadly the infrastructure in the startup ecosystem is much more positive for women to enter at the early stage. I mean, today our average entrepreneur age is 27. This is the average entrepreneur age behind which we are putting 10 to 20 crore rupees in the beginning, right? They happen, because we are tech, so they happen to be tech. Many of them are not MBAs, some of them are MBAs, right? But they have gone through a cycle of work life, couple of years, 3, 4, 5 years. Many of them have got funded by angel investing, and they're running their stuff in incubators and accelerators. So to my mind, the field is wide open, and it is much more democratized today than what it was even, I would say, 3 years back, because your leveling playing field is information.
Saloni, would you agree with that? I mean, one of the things that marks out both Anjana and you really was the very early stage at which you all began. I think you were still in college when you set up your first venture. What typically were the challenges that you've had to overcome as against what Sudhir is now saying has changed so much in the ecosystem?
So I think the challenges really were age more than gender at that point. I mean, everyone would look at you when you went with your idea and they said, great PhD project, maybe you should, stay at it, but it probably won't become a company. And I look back and I see we're 700 people today. And it makes me really proud to go back and say, hey, it wasn't a PhD project. But I think thank you. One of the very interesting things which just occurred to me while we were sitting here was that in my first company, when you said about the supply chain, so we set up BPOs and KPOs in small towns and villages. And we would often get 100% resumes from women in the first year, often in our centers. And when we hit 3 years, we would start seeing men applying to the job, because then they considered this to be a stable, good option to work in those areas. And men were allowed to travel and go out, whereas women had to stay back in those local geographies for whatever reason, family or otherwise. And so we, not by design, but just as it happened, we actually, out of our 700, 65% are a women workforce. In my second startup, which is a health and wellness startup, there is only one guy in the company, again not by design, there's only one guy in the company and he manages the reception. And it's again not by design, but it's just happened, and I'm just thinking about this while we were having this conversation. And now I work for the government. I work with this organization called Invest India, which is 49% government and 51% industry. We actually have 54% women in our organization. So I feel that a lot of good work, like Sudhir was saying, you look at merit, you don't look at gender.
It's gender agnostic. So Anjana, how important is role modeling in that sense?
I think it's extremely important. I think that's where it's lacking. I don't think we have too many women role models to look up to. I think there's a dearth of them, right? And I think there are a lot of issues that women in general face that sometimes the guy in the room just doesn't understand. So it would really help if there were women role models to look up to that, or you can reach out to. But I think, again, it's really early in the game. You hardly have a handful. I mean, Kiran Mazumdar and 2 or 3 other people, there are hardly a handful of people in industry. I guess in the banking sector, there are a lot more. But I guess when you're 23, 24, when at that stage you have role models or mentors who've been there, who've been through the entire cycle of starting, exiting or listing or whatever the entire process is, they're able to share that journey with you, that would help. Because I see that today with the women, 60% of my leadership team are women today. And I see that today, right? So when they talk to me, I mean, I come from the retail industry, which is traditionally a male-dominated industry. Sure. So these women who've been working in the industry for 20, 25 years, their experiences are completely different. For me, I don't think, I was lucky enough not to have to deal with it because I started out and I've got a head start that I set the rules in that, in the space that I work in. But I think, I think even when I'm able to share whatever their experiences are, so a small example of something would be a woman who heads one of our most successful brands called Wrong. She had 13 years of work experience, and after that, when she took a break to take care of her children and go back to the industry, nobody gave her a job. So for 2 years, nobody gave her a job, and when she came to me, I was like, it's ridiculous, because nothing takes away the 13 years of experience you've had. A break doesn't.
Absolutely.
And today, probably one of the most successful people in my office is Shruti, who's, I mean, a 2-year break didn't make a difference to anybody's life. So I think, if you have more and more women in those leadership roles, they're able to look past that break that I guess some men don't or aren't able
Exactly.
to. So.
Priyanka, in your case, you're not just, I mean, it's not just about a workplace or you being a woman founder. Your market really is built on women itself. So how do you view this? I mean, what really are the challenges that you see in this? What are the benefits that you have, that you see in looking at building scale in a market that's focused on women?
Yeah, so I mean, it's interesting, right? So 68, 65, 68% female, we are 183 people. My leadership team is 65% female, if I'm not mistaken. So yeah, same. So I think female founders, female CEOs tend to build companies where women feel supported, where women feel encouraged, and they are given spaces to grow. That is an undoubted fact. I think change happens is when male founders and male CEOs are able to do the same thing. I think that is the golden ticket that we are all after. So coming to your question about targeting a female market, it is entirely by design. Do what you know, do it well, and you do it best, right? I understand women, my team understands women, and women were this hotly uncontested space as far as media companies, and I know it's Economic Times, and I'm very grateful that I'm here, but as far as media companies and content companies went, when we started, and that was my pitch to IDG, there was not a single company that was looking at providing content online for women at scale, which is strange because of 40–50% of your digital population is female. They are looking for content that speaks to them, that's tailored for them. And the growth of PopXO over these past, we complete 5 years this March, the growth of PopXO over these 5 years has been predicated on the single laser focus that women is our market, and women is where we're going to build all the value that we're going to get. And that's really worked for us because you are not men and you are women, and every decision you do is tailored to that. Having that focus has been the single most important thing that's helped us grow.
And so Sudhir, since it's a nice opportunity to put you on the spot, so when will Chirati get a woman partner as an investor?
In due course of time, I think so, and I'll say why also. I think the environment is such that we ourselves have experienced, and as I said, hindsight, but completely on merit, the fact that having women in the team is introducing extreme competition within the firm itself. That's a given. I think the other thing for funds like us, which is happening, is that international and domestic investors, LPs, I think their focus on gender diversity inside the firm is very high overall, which I think is good. So, which is bringing the recognition up to a higher level. So, at all layers within the firm, to my mind, the incoming of women will increase. There's no question. I think many of people like us are more sensitized towards the fact that we should sort of go a little bit here. You do require support, you do require safety. So we put together safety related issues when women go home because it's necessary. We've had a few incidents. We have to make sure that those things are taken care of. And I still remember one interview where we were hiring somebody and we said, look, we have facilities by which we make sure that women are safe when they go home. And she was living very far away. And to that extent, she said, I'm going to join now. Okay? So I think we'll have to take those steps which are very necessary and very fundamental to making sure that women can travel to the workplace, can go back home safely. The other thing which I think is very important, and this my colleague who is with us mentioned to me just 2 weeks back, and since I was coming here, I asked her that question. One other thing which she mentioned was, she says, the environment being equal inside the firm in merit-based is very important for women to rise.
Okay.
Okay? This is a professional, she's 24 years old, and she mentioned to me that if the environment is positive in terms of one gender, then it is not good. If the environment is very merit-based inside an organization, then they perceive it to be fair, and then it's good. So I like that because fundamentally merit is merit. So gender and merit going together is actually not, two sides of the coin, it's one side of the coin.
Saroni, I thought we should get you to come in over here. I think one of the dominant themes that I think over the discussion here is that it's about merit, it's gender agnostic. Having said that, how important do you think it is to have more women investors actually who are evaluating ideas, who can do a lot of the hand-holding and the role modeling that, that also is seen as important for more women to come into the fray and to stay there and to build businesses of scale?
I think it's extremely important because girls do need, like we discussed, they do need role models. They need far more encouragement, both at home as well as at the workplace, to sometimes do the same job. I also feel that women often, the stereotype that I see, women ask for more permission, men ask for more forgiveness. And that's what changes the game a lot. So,
just so that we can wrap this in the thing, I thought I could ask each of you in turn really, what would you tell a woman entrepreneur, Anjana, if she were to ask you for advice? Is there something different that you would ask her to do as you would say?
I agree with what she said. I think we apologize a lot more. We ask, we don't tell. I don't think we're affirmative as much as we need to be. And yeah, I think just be yourself. And I don't think the bias should enter your head, especially if you're going to a VC to pitch. I think it's, as long as you believe and you've got the motivation to drive it through, I think that's what's important. And I guess stop being less apologetic. I think that's what we all invariably do, I guess. That needs to stop.
Then, Saloni, from your perspective, what really should a woman entrepreneur do to break through? The numbers we know are not good, as against the numbers in the panel here.
like I said, stop asking for permission, start doing whatever you want to do, just keep doing it. At the end of the day, it's compounding, it's consistency that brings the results. So don't let go. And if things get tough, it's okay, they will get tough, but just keep going.
How many more women founders are you going to back?
Yeah. No, I think one, there was a good incident. So one of our team members came back to me, and I was giving her or asking her to take a much higher responsibility, which was beyond her age, because I really thought she was capable. And the first question she asked me was, "Do you think I'm really capable?" I've never seen that, let's say, of the guys' team, if I may say. And I advised her, I said, look, never ask that question. And I think it's the same thing.
Absolutely.
Right? Don't ask me that question. I do see that. And, whether it's right or wrong is not the issue. I think it's important that initially that maybe from the family or from role models, this is very important. Self-belief is absolutely critical to success. And I think once that is, by the way, in the last 4 months, she has not used that word. Okay? Which I think is very important. And for that, the counseling doesn't have to necessarily come from women. It has to come from all team members around.
And if I can just add one little point to that, I think in addition to self-belief, it's also knowing that you can go back and negotiate. Okay. We were discussing this last night at dinner, but I think I've seen this often, that when I've given a task which is far, like in this case, right, far exceeds the person's ability of what they think, but I feel that they're ready, the men or the boys will always come back and negotiate, saying, I'll do this if you give me this, this and this. But a girl will get scared and she'll say, but I can't do it. And that is a big part of coaching for me with my leadership team, that it's okay for you to come back. If I'm giving you an impossible target, it's not because it is impossible. I think you can do it. I just want you to think through and come back and say, give me X number of people, give me so much time, whatever it is, but come back and negotiate, and you have that ability. So don't get scared about it. So I just wanted to add that to this point.
Priyanka, I wanted to ask you again. So yes, you're a successful founder. You've gone out and built scale. You focused on a market that's predicated on women. How many top women managers do you have in the team really, and what does it take to really get a senior level of management?
That's easy. Except tech and product, finance. Everyone's female. All my seniors are female.
Okay.
I'll give you kind of a real life example, right? So we are a female product. We are arguably one of the largest female focused products around. I was looking for someone to head my product team. And it was a really big struggle. Good PMs are impossible to find. If anyone's just wondering what they should do in life, if they have any interest in this part of the world, please do it. It's extremely lucrative, right? And I was like, guys, there's no budget. Just get me someone smart. Then this lady came along. She was IIT Delhi, IIM Ahmedabad, and I was really excited to see the CV. I'm like, oh my God, she's in product, and she looks really good on paper. So I did the interview, and I really liked her, right? I get bored in an interview very quickly, and this was the one it carried on for a while. I was really enjoying engaging with her. And I'm like, listen, I know you're young. You haven't handled a full product yourself. You've handled many features in different products. I really want you to come on board and be the head of product for our company. And then she looks at me, and to Sudhir's point, and to my face, she says, I don't think I have the skills for this, Priyanka. And I looked at her and said, listen, don't ever say that, and B, we will train, coach, help, mentor. I will be there next to you to make sure that you're okay. And to my greatest disappointment, she said no. And we went after her for almost like 10 days. Literally, I sent different people to meet her, kind of talk her through. It didn't happen. And I was like so dejected at the point. A female product lead is like gold dust. And she could not get her head around the fact that she hasn't led a product to date, and PopExos is kind of for her a large product, and she wouldn't be able to do it. So my message is that say yes first, figure out the rest later. Life is like that, and that always works, right? So that, and the second point to that is, it is going to be tough. It's going to be bloody difficult, and that is just the way this game is designed. Don't expect it to be easy. At every stage, like we are sitting here, you guys might feel like, oh my God, but I promise you, all of us have 27,000 things that are running at the back of our head of things that need to be done, things that worry us, right? It's difficult at every stage. It never gets easy. You have to enjoy that, and that has to drive you. And lastly, I mean, don't take no for an answer. Like, no is not a word that you recognize, right? If I took no from the many, many people who've said no over the course of these past 5 years, I wouldn't be here today. As long as you don't take no, you keep doing what you want to do, and you really believe in it, the world's your oyster. So yeah, it's possible. You just don't have to take no.
On that note, I think it's self-belief, really, that will make the difference between going places and probably not seeing your dreams come true. Thanks very much for being such an engaging panel. Thank you.
Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, a warm round of applause for Archana Rai and those wonderful panelists for Startups Won't Stop. And yes, I think it's time to just say yes and follow with the rest, like Priyanka said. So yeah, they just made it sound so easy, and it was very motivating, and I'm sure their advice is going to go a long way to inspire each one of us in this room who's trying to put a startup together. And now I'll leave you with an important point to ponder. Can you think of anything that a cup of tea cannot solve? I think it's now time to take a short 10-minute tea break. Please don't be late, as we have a lot of exciting sessions lined up for you. Very soon, Aditi Mittal will be tickling your funny bone. And later, Lieutenant Commander Vartika Joshi is going to be sharing her amazing story of leading an all-women sailing crew around the world. We also have 2 senior women IPS officers who've been fighting both terrorists and sexism, not too different. Well, tea is served outside in the foyer and also in the adjoining rooms, Gulmohar and Jacaranda, so please head out. And as you head out, please remember to visit the Facebook Experience Zone to participate in their fascinating new initiative. And I'm going to see you exactly at 11:50. Don't be late and enjoy your cup. Thank you.